The desert sun hung low and cruel as Ethan Cole rode toward the trading post at Red Mesa, his horse limping nearly as badly as he was. 3 days without proper water had burned his throat raw, and the bullet crease along his ribs throbbed with every breath. He had no patience for trouble. All he wanted was fresh supplies and a horse, strong enough to carry him out of Apache land before nightfall swallowed the desert whole. The trading post was nearly deserted. A few Apache men stood near the corral, watching him with unreadable faces. When Ethan dismounted, he noticed their weapons were close at hand, but not raised. That alone told him how desperate things had become. The frontier was changing. Money meant less out here, and survival meant everything. Ethan offered silver and ammunition in exchange for a horse. The eldest of the Apache men shook his head slowly. He spoke in broken English, explaining that horses were scarce and war had made trade dangerous. Payment, he said, must be equal to the risk. The old man gestured behind him. A young woman stepped forward. Her hands were bound loosely with leather, more symbolic than restraining. Dust clung to her worn dress, yet she stood tall, chin lifted, eyes sharp and unafraid. There was no pleading in her gaze, no fear, only a quiet fire that unsettled Ethan more than a drawn blade. "A slave," the man said simply. "She will work. She will obey." Ethan felt his stomach twist. He despised the practice, had seen too much cruelty pass itself off as law in the West. But he was injured, alone and deep in hostile territory. Refusing could mean walking into the desert without a horse, or worse. He convinced himself that taking her meant keeping her alive, that he could release her once he reached safer ground. He nodded once stiffly, sealing the trade. As they rode away, Ethan became increasingly aware of her presence behind him. She moved with quiet confidence, handling the terrain as if she knew it intimately. When the horse stumbled, she steadied herself without a sound. More than once, Ethan caught her studying the horizon, not like someone lost, but like someone measuring distance and time. They made camp as night fell, the desert cooling rapidly. Ethan handed her food and water. She accepted them without thanks, meeting his eyes for the first time. "My name is Ayana," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You believe you have bought a slave." She leaned closer to the firelight, shadows dancing across her face. "You have not." Morning broke cold and pale, the kind of desert dawn that crept in, silently before the sun burned everything it touched. Ethan woke to find Ayana already awake, crouched near the dying embers of the fire, sharpening a stick against a stone. She did not look up when he stirred, and for a moment he wondered if she would run. Instead, she rose calmly and began packing the bedrolls without being told. As the hours passed, it became clear she was not what the traders had claimed. She worked, but not like someone trained to obey. She chose her tasks, moved with purpose, and never waited for instruction. When Ethan pointed toward a stream bed and suggested she fetch water, she met his gaze, paused, then nodded once, agreeing, not submitting. It unsettled him more than open defiance would have. By midday, Ethan noticed tracks paralleling there. Route light, careful, Apache. He said nothing at first, hoping he was mistaken. But the feeling of being watched grew heavier with every mile. When he finally slowed the horses, Ayana spoke before he could. "They will not attack," she said quietly. "Not yet." Ethan turned sharply. "You know they're there." She did not deny it. Her eyes scanned the ridgeline as if she could see through stone and dust. They followed to observe, not to kill. That night, an arrow struck the ground just beyond the edge of their camp, quivering in the firelight. It was placed with precision, not meant to harm, only to warn. Ethan stood slowly, hand hovering near his revolver, heart pounding. "This is about me, isn't it?" he asked. Ayana finally faced him fully. "No," she said. "It is about me." Frustration tightened Ethan's chest. He demanded answers, but she offered only fragments. She spoke of misunderstanding, of choices made for reasons he would not yet grasp. When he pressed harder, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing a faint burn mark on her shoulder, a symbol Ethan recognized from years as a scout. It was not a mark given to servants or captives. It was a mark of leadership. Before he could speak, shadows moved beyond the firelight. Horses snorted softly. Shapes emerged from the darkness, silent and controlled. A man stepped forward, older than the rest, wearing feathers that spoke of authority. Ayana straightened, her posture changing instantly, pride radiating from her like heat. "My father has come," she said. Ethan's breath caught as the truth settled heavily in his bones. The woman he had believed a slave was something far more dangerous and far more powerful. The Apache chief dismounted with measured calm, his boots touching the sand as if the earth itself welcomed him. His presence commanded silence. The warriors fanned out in a wide circle, their weapons lowered but ready, eyes fixed on Ethan with the patience of hunters who already knew the outcome. Ethan felt the weight of their judgment press down on him, heavier than any gun he had ever carried. The chief's gaze never left Ayana. There was no anger in his eyes, only relief, tightly controlled. He spoke to her in their language, his voice low and firm. She answered without hesitation, her words flowing with confidence and strength. Ethan understood none of it, but he understood the tone. This was not a reprimand, it was a reckoning. When the chief finally turned his attention to Ethan, the air seemed to thin. Ethan stood his ground, though every instinct told him he was outmatched. He kept his hands visible, his revolver untouched. "My daughter," the chief said in English, his voice steady, "was never a slave." Murmurs rippled through the warriors, though their eyes never wavered. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. Before he could speak, the chief continued, explaining that Ayana had chosen to walk among their enemies, to learn their ways and measure their hearts. She had offered herself as payment, knowing the risk, trusting the spirits to guide her fate. Ethan felt anger flare, not at the chief, but at the lie he had lived inside. "She could have been killed," he said. "She could have been treated worse." Ayana stepped forward. "But I was not," she said firmly, "because he chose differently." The chief studied Ethan closely, weighing her words. He asked how she had been treated, whether she had been harmed or humiliated. Ayana answered honestly, sparing neither praise nor truth. She spoke of respect, of distance kept, of choices allowed. Each word shifted the balance, though the danger remained. Still, honor demanded a price. The chief declared that Ethan had taken what belonged to the Apache, even unknowingly. Blood was owed, or service. The choice was simple and cruel. Ethan could die where he stood, or he could guide the Apache safely through territory, crawling with soldiers, using his knowledge of patrol routes and terrain. Ethan did not hesitate. "I'll guide you," he said. Ayana met his eyes then, something like gratitude softening her fierce expression. The chief nodded once, accepting the bargain. As the circle of warriors closed ranks, Ethan understood that survival was no longer his greatest test. Honor was. The journey through contested land began before dawn, when the desert still held its breath and the stars faded slowly from the sky. Ethan rode at the front, guiding the Apache warriors through narrow ravines and forgotten trails he had learned years ago as a scout. Every mile carried danger. Army patrols moved unpredictably, and bounty hunters prowled the edges of the territory, eager for blood and reward. Trust did not come easily. The warriors watched Ethan closely, measuring every decision, every pause. One wrong turn would mean death, not only for him but for all of them. Ayana rode near the center of the group, silent but alert, her presence a steady force. At times their eyes met, and Ethan saw the weight she carried, loyalty to her people, and the burden of the path she had chosen. On the third day, soldiers appeared on the horizon. Dust rose behind them in a long, unmistakable line. Panic rippled through the Apache ranks, but Ethan raised his hand, signaling for calm. He led them into a dry canyon, masking their tracks with careful detours and false trails. When the soldiers drew closer, Ethan made his choice. He rode out alone. He fired into the air, drawing attention, then vanished into the rocks, leading the soldiers away from the canyon. Bullets tore through stone and sand as he pushed his horse to its limits. Pain exploded in his side when a round caught him, but he stayed in the saddle until the soldiers were far enough to give chase in the wrong direction. By the time Ethan circled back, night had fallen. The canyon was empty. The Apache were gone. Exhausted and bleeding, Ethan collapsed near the fire's cold remains. He did not know how long he lay there before footsteps approached. Ayana emerged from the darkness alone, My father has honored his word, she said softly. You have paid the debt. She knelt and tended his wound, her hands steady and gentle. When she finished, she cut a strip of leather from her belt and placed it in his palm, a sign of freedom among her people. You could have left, she said. You did not. Ethan looked at her, understanding finally settling in his chest. Neither did you. Ayanna smiled faintly before turning away. As she disappeared into the desert, Ethan knew the story would travel far, of a debt paid not in blood, but in honor written across the dust.